So before I start the video, I just need to make something clear. This will be an audio-only video, and there's a very simple reason for that. I was at my grandparents' and left my tripod there, because I'm an idiot, if you couldn't tell that already. So the RTD2/Disney Plus deal era of Doctor Who, this recent era, it's come to a bit of an anticlimax again, really, with the War Between the Land and the Sea spin-off, the 5-part mini-series focused on the unit family that have kind of built up during Russell's era, you know, Kate Stewart, Colonel Ibrahim, Shirley Ann Bingham, a lot of the regular unit characters, as well as Russell Tovey as Barclay, not the character from Voyage of the Damned, and also the return of the Sea Devils, obviously the monster that were introduced during the Jon Pertwee years of the aquatic cousins of the Silurians, and their track record in Doctor Who, it's not been great. The original Jon Pertwee Sea Devil story is, for the longest time, I always thought was quite good. It was always one of my favourites, but thinking about it, it's not great. It's fun, but it is a bit rehashy of the Silurians. Warriors of the Deep is infamously terrible. Legend of the Sea Devil is one of the absolute worst episodes of the revived era. So yeah, they have not had the best track record in Doctor Who, despite being such an iconic monster. I think recently, and I think with Legend of the Sea Devils, I think really solidified this. These are villains from the show that just aren't as good as their reputation really gives them. I think everybody knows those iconic images of the classic Sea Devil design, the images of those coming out of the water in that 70s Jon Pertwee story, but the stories, they're just the Silurians in the water. Like, it's not that creative, and that sort of formula of the humans and Silurians/Sea Devils possibly try and get a peace deal, but one member of each party is a bad un and he wrecks it. We've seen that many times before, and whilst War Between the Land and the Sea does do some different things and does develop on some of those ideas, that's the core problem that I think going into this I felt. Yeah, I'm going to front load this review by saying the War Between the Land and the Sea just isn't awful. I didn't despise it overall, aside from the last episode, but if I'm honest, probably the most disappointing part, actually no. I was going to say it's the most disappointing part of the RTD2 era, but really, there are so many episodes that could crown that title. No, I think why I was disappointed with the show is because it was kind of being billed as a bit more of like a grounded, gritty political thriller about the environment, and, you know, it was going to be a bit different from the light-hearted fantasy that Doctor Who usually indulges in. So I was looking forward to a show that didn't feel very Doctor Who, and for a lot of it, that is still true. It didn't necessarily feel like Doctor Who, which is a good thing. I think a spin-off should feel different from the main show. But at the end, it just felt like any other generic sci-fi show. It didn't really feel particularly mature or deep or profound. It felt, frankly, quite immature at points, and we'll get to that in a bit, but it didn't really blow me away. Like, as a piece of pulp sci-fi, it was fine, and it was enjoyable enough for certain episodes, and I'll get to some positives as well. But from a point of view of being like a kind of, you know, Sunday night sort of, you know, proper prestige drama, it falls flat on its arse. It really does. And yet this series still got higher viewing figures than the majority of Ncuti Gatwa's era. So I'll go through some positives to start with. First of all, Russell Tovey is the lead, Barclay. I thought he was solid for most of the series. I think he served as a decent, like, everyman kind of character. He felt quite affable, quite relatable, and, you know, Tovey did give quite a grounded performance. He's a very good actor. Obviously, he's been in Doctor Who before in Voyage of the Damned, but I've seen him in other things, and he's just a generally very reliable British actor in a lot of, like, these kind of dramas, and I think he just suited the everyman personality of Barclay quite well. It was nice seeing the unit crew, like Kate, Ibrahim, Shirley Ann. It was nice seeing those in the series. I like how they developed on the Kate Ibrahim romance, although it's something that, you know, Kate being her boss, it's not exactly a romance that I was clamouring for because the optics are not great. And that did lead to a very shocking cliffhanger in part 3, which maybe it was partly kind of shock value, but it was still effective in the moment. As I said at the top of the review, as a bit of pulp sci-fi, I think this series does work quite well. And in certain moments, particularly episode 2 and 3, which I would say is probably where the show peaked, I think, you know, the plastic apocalypse in episode 2, where you have all the plastic from the oceans being chucked out onto land. That was a really great sort of set piece, you know, some really brutal moments. Like when the driver gets crushed in the front seat by I think it's the washing machine that, like, comes flooding down on him. I think that was a really effective, quite brutal moment. And then in episode 3, when the human ambassadors, they go underwater, you have them in that little submarine that goes down, and, you know, it provides like a solid, like, claustrophobic kind of thriller. You know, it's quite atmospheric, and I wish they built it a little bit more, but I think it was solid. And then when they reach the Sea Devils base and they see all their sort of world, I think there's a you know, twinge of that kind of Doctor Who aura about it, that kind of magic where you're discovering a new world for the first time. I think I quite like that. This series had 2 credited writers. Ross T. Davies, obviously, who is an exec producer and obviously the head honcho of this era. He wrote episodes 1 and 5, And then you had Pete McTighe, who he's written a few episodes recently in Doctor Who, but he also wrote episodes 2, 3, and 4. And I think his stuff is very clearly the better parts of it. He, of course, wrote Kablam and Praxis in the Jodie era, and also Lucky Day in the Ncuti era. And those are episodes that, you know, they have their problems, but I think he really understands, Pete McTighe, how to create just like fun Doctor Who, you know, that fun pulpy sci-fi vibe. You know, whether it's the Kablam robots and sort of some of the action set pieces in that, whether it's Praxis, a kind of ecological thriller, a bit similar to what War Between is going for. And I think that's a good comparison. I think he was a very appropriate writer to bring on. You know, flaws aside, I think he understands what makes fun Doctor Who and like fun sci-fi. And I think you get that in his episodes of the show. They're ultimately not that deep. I think a lot of the political commentary is kind of quite surface level, but he does know how to keep a story going. You know, I say the Plastic Apocalypse, it's a great visual and a great idea realised, kind of using this miniseries to expand on those ideas from some of those 70s and 80s stories with the Sea Devils. I said the kind of claustrophobic sort of bottle episode of The Deep in episode 3, and then Barclay and Salt, who's the Sea Devil he falls in love with, on the run as fugitives in episode 4. I think, you know, he knows how to keep the kind of momentum of these kind of pulpy sci-fi thrillers going, and I appreciate that. I think a lot can also be credited to the director, Dylan Holmes Williams, who he was the director of some of the best episodes in the Ncuti era, like 73 Yards and Dot and Bubble, which visually, they were fantastic, had some great shots and just great visual style. And I think War Between overall, it looks great, generally speaking. You know, I like the production value, I like the design of the Sea Devils, I like, you know, I do think they are, you know, well designed, and I don't mind the fact that they are different from the 70s version. You know, that is something that, in reflection, Legend of the Sea Devils should have updated the design of them, but oh well. And some of these set pieces, as I was talking about, Williams does direct them very well, and they are fun, they're visually quite strong. I think, you know, it is entertaining on that surface level. But that's where my positives end, and that's where I'm going to get into some of the negatives, because, as I say, you know, on a surface level, kind of action, sci-fi thriller, you know, it's enjoyable enough, but in terms of it trying to be like a deeper political commentary about the environment and what we're doing to the oceans and how that will come back to bite humanity's arse, this show, quite ironically, falls flat on its arse by trying to do that, because it is just so messy about how it's written like that. A lot of the sort of political intrigue just feels very... It starts off decently. I think episodes 1 and 2 do give us a decent, really decent setup with some quite relatable aspects and topics. And I think that it starts off quite strong and has a lot of potential. And throughout, there are some moments like peppered throughout that, you know, are interesting ideas, but they don't expand upon them really. And in episode 3, the human ambassador basically destroys with that, you know, fake globe bomb, destroys the whole Sea Devils environment and basically massacres them. In that moment, the whole kind of idea of, oh, you know, sort of political violence, you could kind of make that allegory. It's not really said, but that could have been an interesting sort of thing to play into. I also thought the whole thing with the American general, he very much takes command of the British Army. I think that was kind of an interesting point you could maybe make about how powerful America is over the UK, like historically. That could have been an interesting point in episode 4 that kind of comes up. But again, they're very fleeting moments. They're not really developed. And then from around halfway through episode 3 and then fully in episodes 4 and 5, you have the whole romantic subplot with Barclay and the Sea Devil Salt, who, I mean, I was making jokes that this was like Guillermo del Toro's The Shape of Water, and it literally becomes that in the final scene of the show, and it's ridiculous. I mean, first of all, I don't really think you need this. It's the least interesting part. Like, focus on the action, focus on some of the politics and whatnot. You know, don't focus on a stupid romance like this that is just completely undercooked. Or if you were going to, do what Del Toro does in The Shape of Water and make it thematic and make it like genuinely meaningful. Like, you know, you can still do it if it works. That film proves it, but this doesn't at all. And what was being billed as a prestigious drama features boner jokes about man and fish bonking. You know, you've got, oh, I can regulate my body too. Sol looks down. I can see that.
Oi!
Barclay.
He's got a boner!
And the whole thing at the end where Barclay grows gills, like it literally just becomes The Shape of Water, so they can live underwater together. What is this? Oh, not the fact that he leaves his wife and kid? What's going on there? And then, don't get me started on that last episode. Again, I don't know what it is. Russell, with Empire of Death, The Reality War, and episode 5 of this show, he cannot write finales to save his life now. I mean, first of all, the whole thing of like, the whole severance virus that the government officials were planning to wipe out the Sea Devils or whatever it is, that just came out of nowhere. Like, I'm genuinely confused of how the resolution of this series panned out. Even though I watched it, I still don't get it. It just feels like 1 minute the war's going on, next minute, we all surrender, the Sea Devils do, the humanity has won the war, and it's like, what? And the most consequences that those government officials get, they just get some weird flash vision, like dream sequencey things of like, oh, the water will come for you one day and they get killed by water, and it's like, oh, that'll teach them a lesson. It won't. Of course it won't. And then that final scene after Russell Tovey grows gills and lives happily ever after with a fish woman. Did I just say that sentence? Sorry, after that moment where Barkley and Salt live happily ever after, you get Kate Stewart on the beach, and there's a runner who drops a plastic bottle, and she's like, pick it up, pick it up, pick it up, and keeps repeating that, and then points a gun at him to pick it up. And that's the note that the show ends on. And genuinely, I don't often find things laughably bad. Like, I can find things ironically funny, but the whole term, like, laughably bad, I don't often have that gut reaction. The end of this show, I was pissing myself laughing, because, like, genuinely, that's so it's comical. It's exactly what the problem people have with, like, politics, you know, in media is nowadays. It's like, if you don't agree, I'm going to pull a gun at you. And it's like, what the... That's not how you write politics. That's not how you write a show. What is this? But going into 2026, Doctor Who really is in dire straits. I mean, my old brother-in-arms of a show, what this new era promised a new walk of life for the show, but really, Disney and BBC just threw money for nothing at this thing, and it ultimately ended up in tatters. And yes, I'm making a lot of dire straits jokes because I can, although... You know, I was going to say, I don't know how to fit Sultans of Swing into this naturally, but Sultans of Swing, Salt was one of the characters in the show. It's a stretch, but it's more compelling than the thing I've had to review, so what of it? So in terms of rating the show, I don't really know how to do it. I mean, on Letterboxd, I gave it a 5 out of 10, you know, because as I say, overall, judging it overall, it was a fine bit of pulp sci-fi entertainment for the majority of it, but man, it really doesn't stick the landing, and it just, again, feels very disappointing because what could have been a genuinely mature, thoughtful series ended up just being really immature. That's my take on The War Between the Land and the Sea. What did you think of it? Did you enjoy it? If you did, I genuinely want to know, and like, I'm happy for you if you enjoyed it. I understand why you might enjoy it if it was, you know, because obviously it's quite different from Doctor Who, so I get if you enjoyed it, but for me personally, I just didn't, and I want to, you know, get that discussion going. I'm very curious to hear what people have to say. And since I've not really been in the Doctor Who fan sphere as much these days, I don't really generally know what the consensus is, apart from like the odd few YouTubers that I still do watch. So it'll be interesting to see what, you know, generally, what do you guys think? Am I in the minority in this case? I don't know, I could be, but I have a feeling I'm not, because I've heard not the best things about the finale, so, you know. But whether you like it or dislike it, I want to hear it, and, you know, let's get the discussion going in the comments. Be sure to like, subscribe, and comment for, you know, and ring the bell so you don't miss new content, because I'm looking, as I say, to try and get and push more content out there into 2026. I'm trying to get back into the YouTube game in a sense. And until next time, which hopefully should be very soon, hopefully you're not having to wait 2 months for videos now, but until next time, you take care and have a nice day.